My guest today is Brian Pennie. On October the 8th, 2013, he experienced his first day clean after 15 years of chronic heroin addiction. Since embracing his second chances life, he has become a doctor of neuroscience and psychology, consultant to some of the world's largest corporations, a neuroscience lecturer in Trinity College and University College Dublin, a life strategist, and an author of his memoir, Bonus Time. So welcome to the show, Brian. Lovely to have you here. How are you doing today? On
I'm
St.
doing
Patrick's Day.
on St. Patrick's Day, indeed. Yeah, lovely to be here, Madeleine. It's a privilege. Really looking forward to having this conversation.
Oh, you're welcome. I just have to say, it won't be St. Patrick's Day when we put this out, but today we're recording on St. Patrick's Day. So as the show is called Unbroken, the very first question I always ask every single guest is, what does the word unbroken mean to you, Brian?
I love the question, but I also love the word unbroken. I love reversal. So broken, unbroken. I love playing with this, Madeleine. And that question just means so many things to me. When I heard it, the first thing that jumps to mind is flexibility. It's an ability to be flexible with the changing environments, because when the wind blows and life throws those curveballs our way, if you're rigid, you're going to break. And there's a line, one of my favorite quotes, it's a line by Ernest Hemingway, and it's really lovely, and it plays around with this. So the world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places, but those that do not break, it kills. And I love that quote. And it really, like, it's talking about being broken, but I don't know if you are actually broken. I think you are bent badly, maybe you are challenged massively, but I don't think you're actually broken. And it brings me to another point as well on that. For me, the part of me, you could have considered me a broken person at the height of my addiction, but the journey of me of becoming unbroken, or healing myself, started when I actually surrendered, when I put the white flag up and I stopped fighting with my mind, I stopped fighting with reality. And it was like the start of something else, the start of building that flexibility to be able to be agile emotionally and mentally and physically agile in the world we live in. So long answer, but it's I just think flexibility is the one word that really captures it.
It's a great answer. In my mind, the image that comes to me is of a tree. That, a
Yes.
tree has to bend and go with the storms and the wind, but you have to keep your roots firmly planted. Otherwise, if you lose your roots and you pop out the ground, you're a goner. So yeah, I just have this vision of you being like a tree that's been swaying in the wind, but you're firmly
Yeah.
planted now.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting what you said as well, Madeline. Like, it took a long time for me to get there. Like, I describe myself as chronically addicted for 15 years. Like, I took heroin pretty much every day for 15 years. But even in the early stages, I had a job. I had what looked like a normal life. I think I talk about it in the book as when two worlds collide. I had this outer world that people seen where I looked okay, and I went on holidays and I drove a car, but I was a chronic heroin addict within the back of that as well. And yeah, it's really interesting the way it grabs you in, and you're sort of nearly forced to live these two lifestyles, because you can't just go around telling people that you do heroin, and you need this crutch. So it sort of pushes you in a certain direction and pushes that self-delusion into another level where you're forced to lie, and then you start believing the lies yourself, and it just
Hmm.
become very challenging. Habituation kicks in, the biology kicks in, where the drugs are not doing the job anymore. They're actually causing you to be more anxious. So you're just trying to get a drug to feel sort of semi okay. And then how does your mind deal with that? How does the self-deception deal with that? So you're telling yourself a lie that the drugs is making you feel better, but they're not making you feel better anymore. It's like a rule you've created to yourself, a self-rule that you've created to yourself. But at the same time, you've created this ego, this addiction ego. It's an identity that you have formed through your stories, through your beliefs. And that ego has a voice, has a power in itself, and that will protect itself at all costs. So any sort of inclination that the drugs would have to be taken away was absolutely terrifying for me. It was the death of the ego, and it felt like death itself. So you would come up and spin any lie just to be able to protect that. But it's the lack of awareness. Like, you can't even see it. And I think that's the scary thing.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I am a former psychotherapist, so I think the lack of awareness, whatever our issue, that's always the issue,
Yes.
is whether we're addicted to heroin, or if we're whatever we're going through. It's always that we don't see it. We're like the last ones to see it.
Yeah, it's isn't that crazy, isn't it? And
Yes.
it's in life now today, in recovery today. Like I've lots of tools too. Like I don't think addiction is even addiction. It's a lack of awareness. And when I went to a treatment center, there was a priest there that spoke so much truth, and he called it an awareness center. So
Yes.
one of the biggest, the most important tool in my life is self-observation. I'm always inwardly looking at my emotions, my feelings, my thoughts, my bodily
Which
sensations.
is not an easy job to do, because I remember in my training
Ooh,
how we had to witness and journal and really
yes.
observe who's sitting in the chair, you know. It's not an easy job to do.
It's really really difficult, and I think it's about changing the relationship with that as well. And I think consistency comes into play here as well. Like you have to be consistently looking inwards to catch that. But it's just so difficult. Like awareness for me is the catalyst for change. Like it's once you become, you can have the knowledge. Like I knew drugs were killing me. If someone asked me, is heroin good for me, I'd say no.
We always actually really know whatever we discover, it's never really a surprise, is it?
It's never a surprise.
Never.
It's like an extra. It's like we say a light bulb goes on, but it's not really a big light bulb that makes the room glow. It just gets, it's like a dimmer. It gets a little bit brighter, and you're like, and sometimes you don't want to look because we don't like the truth. The truth can be painful, and
It's
when you know that,
very painful to see what we do
yeah,
to ourselves. And I think you
yeah,
say it's like a dimmer, but I think the layers that we put on, they fall off. The layers come off, and then another
yes,
layer, then another layer, and then you're left with you. You go, oh shit, look what I've done. This
yeah.
is me, nobody else.
Nobody else. But then there's a beauty in that as well, that when you are you and you act like you and you're true, like I try to say, be true to your wonderfully weird self, because we're all wonderfully weird. And
Yes.
when you act and live out that truth, life does get very easier. So it's like it's a hard choice,
Yes,
but it's
I kind of
a
felt
life.
like at that when I got to that stage in my life that I was schizophrenically normal. You know, I was given
Yeah.
this kind of just waking up to all that I had done.
Yeah.
It's an interesting place to get to.
And I love that, schizophrenically normal, because even like I'd say my crazy thinking and addiction, but even today I have some crazy thinking, but I see it and I catch it and I start laughing at it and say, you are bonkers, but we're all bonkers. And it's becoming friendly with the bonkers part of yourself and becoming friendly with your emotions and the anxieties as well, and sort of playing around with that as well. It's another really difficult challenge, but I think the game changer for me in my recovery was, like, I would say, I have a beautiful relationship with anxiety today. I don't like anxiety.
But
Who
that sentence in itself is so kind of bonkers, isn't it? I have a
isn't
beautiful
it?
relationship with anxiety.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? It could be another story I tell myself. It could be more self-deception, but it actually operates for me because we are the stories we tell ourselves and believe. And when I feel anxiety coming into my life, if I'm doing a big talk or I'm going to the next level or I'm doing a big public presentation, I get anxious, but it's like, oh, here's anxiety. Here's me pal. I'm going to let him come in, let him go. He's protecting me. Doesn't always do a great job, but it's going to be okay. It's going to pass and I'm going to be fine.
And I think it's pretty normal to do to feel anxious in front of a big talk. You know, if I'm going to do one, I just think this isn't about me now. This is who is going to help other people, and that just really centers me. And I think that's the trick, isn't it? To ground ourselves, to center ourselves. And in your book, you give quite a few examples where most people would have just flipped and lost it. You know, when you were going to back to Canada, and as a family you had been kicked out. You were just a little boy, and but that caused problems later on, and the visa, and had to go back the next day, and a lot of hassle. But you're like, okay, what can I do? And really, yeah, what can we do in these situations?
What can we do? That was actually a real game changer moment for me, Madeleine. And it's since I've wrote the book, I've spoken about that story, and I realized how big a lesson that was. And it's really interesting. I've another couple of examples of that as well. But really, there's a great line by Viktor Frankl, so one of the most famous psychologists of all time, and Auschwitz survivor, knew a little bit about human suffering.
It did.
And he has a line that I just love: between stimulus and response, there is a space.
Yeah.
In that space is your chance to choose your response. There lies your growth and your freedom. And I think there's a lovely line in Buddhist philosophy known as first and second darts. It's a metaphor. So life throws you these first darts, the challenges of life, and pain is inevitable.
Yeah.
But your response to that pain is optional. And sometimes we throw the second darts at ourselves: guilt, anger, jealousy.
Sometimes.
So a lot of the time, yes, a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But there is that space, and that part of Canada that you described there. Like I got rejected. I was going over to do a big academic talk in Montreal, as they blamed the 5-year-old me as being not as being deported from Canada, and they stopped me getting into the country. So I wrote to them and got an email to say I couldn't go over, but then I got an email to say, oh, you're actually accepted. So I says, I'm going to chance my arm and try to use this ETA system. I got to Canada the following day after paying another €2,000 for a ticket. And we got to Canada, and I was walking in. I got to Canada, I was on my own. And they brought me into a room as I was walking through. I was nearly through. And they brought me through and they said, look, we're going to have to send you back to Ireland. And I remember like the anger inside of me. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. But I just started smiling. What can I do? There was a space between the stimulus and my response. And the woman asked me, says, why are you not bothered by this? What's the situation? And I says, look, I was in addiction for years. I practice mindfulness. I'm over to do a talk on mindfulness. I wouldn't really be living me truth if I start freaking out. And she looked at me, stamped me ticket, and says, go do your talk.
I loved that woman. I just wanted
I
to high five her in the book.
Yeah. I wish I could meet her again.
Because really it's about reaction or response, isn't it? Are we just going to react in that moment, or can we take a few moments to think, I'm okay. Well, what's the worst that can happen? They find another speaker, they have to cancel it. I go back home, I sort out my visa. It is about reaction or response, and I think that lesson is for everyone, isn't it?